Julia.
Enough chatter.
Okay, we are now live.
Good afternoon, members of the committee and members of the public. I will now call the Planning Advisory Committee to order. As this meeting is being held virtually, I will go over some rules of procedure for the benefit of members and the viewing public. This meeting is being streamed live via the City of Brantford YouTube account. All members of the committee will be muted upon entering the meeting and throughout when they are not speaking in order to reduce the background noise. All web cameras for committee members shall be turned on throughout the meeting. If a member needs to leave their seat, please leave the camera on so that we recognize you are away. Staff will be requested to join the video meeting should they need to answer questions of members. Any member of committee participating shall indicate they wish to speak, ask questions by raising their hand on camera. Movers and seconders of motions shall be indicated by raising your hand on camera, and the chair will call out who the mover and seconder are. All members of committee participating by online video conference will vote by a physical show of hands. Delegations are participating via Zoom or telephone accordingly. All persons wishing to speak to the items on the agenda were required to register by 9 a.m. Any delegations received in written format have been provided to the members of the committee and will form part of the meeting record. In the event a connection service interruption occurs that affects quorum of the committee, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting is adjourned. All right, Madam Clerk, we can go to roll call. I understand that we have some new members, so I think the best we could do is just begin by just going around the table and introducing ourselves.
Yeah, through the chair. I think everybody's screens are kind of different. So if I call it your name, and then if you just want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself for all of the members. So we can start with Paul Bazanti.
Hi, yes, my name is Paul Bazanti. I work for Lanka Contracting Limited and am the liaison to the Brantford Branch Chamber of Commerce, where I sit as the first vice president of the board.
Great. And Carrie Korfman?
Yes, hello, Carrie Korfman. I own 3 Tim Hortons in town, including the one downtown. And I'm on the board of the BIA. So I'm the BIA rep here.
Great. And Councillor Utley?
Councillor Utley, Ward 2 Councillor, City of Brantford, and very pleased to participate with some fine community citizens. Thank you.
Great. And Greg Nevin?
Oh, and great staff.
Hey everybody, Greg Nevin here. I'm with TD Commercial Banking. I've been on this board for a little over a year, but I think I've only actually attended 1 or 2 in-person meetings, so I'm still relatively fresh and new.
Great. And Mohammed Mibrook?
Hi everyone, Mohammed Iqbal Mibrook here, research manager with the Tangerine Bank. Looking forward to working together. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Dennis Dalloway? You're muted. Oh.
It's okay. I'm struggling today. I just started a new job the other day with Grand River Insurance Brokers, and the new technology isn't working on my laptop, so I'm doing this with my cell phone today. I'm glad to be here, glad to be part of the committee, reacquaintance with some of the folks I've known from town, like Ken from a long time ago, and looking forward to this.
Thank you. Velma Morrison?
Hi, I'm Velma Morrison. I'm a small business advisor with Scotiabank. Moved to Brantford about 6 years ago, and just looking forward to being more active in the community.
Wonderful. Mark Simpson?
I'm Mark Simpson. I am the retired Vice President of Operations and Engineering for Brantford Power and currently a citizen appointee to the committee.
Wonderful. And Chair Ken Krakis?
I'm the chairman of the committee and commercial realtor with Remax Twin City Realty. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. Does any members of the committee have any declarations of conflicts of pecuniary interest to make on any of the items before the committee? Show of hands, no? All right, we'll move on to 3, presentations, declarations. There are no presentations or registered delegates for the meeting. Item 4, items for consideration, zoning bylaw amendment, PZ 0321, amendments to City of Brantford zoning bylaw 160 to 90 and County of Brant zoning bylaw 61-16 in regards to short-term rental accommodations 2021-209. The first item we are considering is in regards to the zoning bylaw amendment for short-term rental accommodations. I understand that staff have a short presentation to introduce the item to the committee. Please, staff, please introduce yourself and present to the members.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Joe Muto, Manager of Development Planning with the city. And I know there's some new members here. Basically what the planning staff do, we have a procedure to advise this committee and gain input on citywide rezoning or official plan matters that our city is considering. Today we have 2 items. One is related to this first item is short-term rental accommodations. And then the second item will be presented by Sean, Mr. Sean House, which is a technical type housekeeping amendment. And we'll look forward for once each presentation is done to answer any questions you may have. Alexandra Mathers is the planner assigned to this update.
Thank you, Joe. Good afternoon. This presentation regards updates to the municipal regulations regarding short-term rental accommodations. Staff are proposing a city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment to define and regulate short-term rental accommodations or Airbnb-style rentals. The city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment is in combination with the proposed registry program through elections, licensing, and administrative services. So prior to jumping into the proposed amendments, it's important to have a background of what a short-term rental accommodation is. Short-term rental accommodations are seen as a dwelling unit, room, or other form of living space which are available for rent on a short-term basis and where the rental is typically facilitated through an online platform, often without in-person interactions. The concept of short-term rental accommodations contributes to the sharing economy. In addition to accommodations, services such as ride shares like Uber, bikes, and community gardens are also included in this in the sharing economy. Further, short-term accommodation arrangements are generally booked using a third-party online platform, such as Airbnb, Vacation Rental by Owner, or VRBO, and Flipkey. Prospective guests can easily search these online platforms for available accommodations at a location of their choice and are instantly connected with photos, guest reviews, and amenity information. So as background, on November 19th, 2019, Brantford City Council approved the municipal licensing of hotels and motels. In addition to implementing the licensing program for hotels and motels, the report also recommended a more comprehensive review of short-term rental accommodations. As a result, planning and licensing staff have conducted research relative to short-term rental accommodations, including the review of the zoning bylaws. Planning staff have identified that short-term rental accommodations are not defined or regulated under the City of Brantford zoning bylaw 16090 or the County of Brant zoning bylaw 6116, which applies to the annexed lands. and a zoning bylaw amendment would be required in order to permit and regulate this use. The licensing program was brought forward at the March 2nd, 2021 Committee of the Whole Operations and Administrative meeting. And in this report, they outlined the registry program that would be in place once the zoning bylaw amendment has been completed. So just to go over a proposal, we're proposing to define short-term rental accommodations in both bylaws, provide regulations associated with the use, and propose appropriate locations for the use. So in consultation with licensing staff, planning staff investigated best practices from municipalities within Canada that are actively regulating short-term rental accommodations through both licensing and zoning bylaw. These municipalities include Oakville, Vancouver, Toronto, Town of Blue Mountains, Prince Edward County, Vaughan, Oshawa, Georgina, Municipality of Grey Highlands, Fort Erie, Niagara-on-the-Lake, and the Township of Minden Hills. Of these 12 municipalities, 8 have defined and regulated short-term accommodations through their zoning bylaw. Of the 8, planning staff have not included Prince Edward County, Town of Blue Mountains, or Niagara-on-the-Lake in our review of comparable municipalities due to the significant differences in tourism and accommodation models that each of these municipalities allow. So of the 5 listed, they each took a different type of approach. Oakville, Vancouver, Toronto, and Oshawa all require short-term accommodations to be located within a principal residence. Each municipality also differed in how they defined a principal residence. Vancouver, Oshawa, and Oakville also defined and regulated bed and breakfast establishments separately than short-term rental accommodations and prohibited them to both be located in the same property at the same time. Only one municipality of the 5 required additional parking regulations, and some had additional regulations aside from the 2 mentioned. So while not defined or regulated as a use in Brantford in the zoning bylaw, short-term accommodations are available on Airbnb within the City of Brantford. Obtaining a sense of exactly how many listings are operated on a given day is difficult, as short-term accommodation platforms remain silent on requests for obtaining information. And in order to gain the specific details for each listing, a booking is required. An operator of a short-term rental accommodation can also spontaneously turn off their listing or on, making it difficult to get a true sense of the number of short-term accommodations in Brantford at a given time. So on March 6th, planning staff conducted a scan of available short-term rental accommodations. Without putting any restriction dates on the Airbnb site, a total of 53 stays were listed within the City of Brantford on Airbnb. Of these stays, 31 were considered entire residence, which is inclusive of homes and entire guest suites, and a total of 22 private rooms were offered and 1 hotel room. Planning staff also conducted a scan on VRBO and Flipkey. However, only 1 property was shown as available, and it was a hotel room. So there are multiple development considerations that must be considered for short-term accommodations. These include impact on housing, equity between accommodation providers, tourism, neighborhood compatibility, and as well, this will be going for public consultation. Our public consultation is planned for April 6th. So one of the most recognized concerns with the rise of short-term accommodation rentals is the impact that this use can have on the housing stock. The Regulating Short-Term Rentals, a toolkit from Canadian local governments, created in consultation with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, provides that there are potential housing affordability and availability harms that arise with short-term accommodations. As stated in the toolkit, when a non-principal residence dwelling is converted into a short-term rental accommodation, it may remove the unit from the availability of the supply of available long-term housing stock and has the ability to drive up housing prices. The potential income of short-term rental accommodations must also be considered, as it has the potential to exceed the revenue of renting out a unit on a long-term market, which can lead to an increase of price of rental housing by reducing the number of units available. The guidelines and toolkits outline principal residence requirements as a possible opportunity to reduce the impact of short-term accommodations on the housing stock. A principal residence is typically considered the dwelling unit where an individual homeowner lives and is generally the residential address used on documentation such as taxes and identification. Applying a principal residence requirement addresses the purchasing of dwelling units by investors for the purpose of creating short-term rental accommodations. I will speak to this, this proposed use later on in the presentation. It is also important to note that short-term accommodations are not without their benefit to housing affordability as well. These benefits are mainly seen when short-term rental accommodations are restricted to a principal residence. These benefits include additional income for homeowners or tenants who are looking to rent out their bedroom or entire unit while on vacation, which in turn can assist with making their mortgage or rent more affordable. Another development consideration is equity between the accommodation providers. We currently license hotels and motels, as well as lodging houses and group homes. So regulating short-term rental accommodations will provide greater regulatory equity across the range of different types of accommodation providers. It is also important to note that short-term rental accommodations should not negatively impact the neighborhoods where they are located. There are multiple ways that we can reduce this impact. By permitting them only within short-term or within principal residences, the dwelling unit continues to be residential in nature, as a short-term rental accommodation in someone's home or part of a home, as it is in part of a home or someone's home. Non-principal residence short-term accommodations are sometimes referred to as ghost hotels, where there's less of a residential feel to the property as no one lives there, and it becomes more of a commercial use like a hotel. When restricted to primary residence, short-term accommodations can take on a true home sharing nature, where it is secondary to the primary principal use. When short-term accommodations are permitted within accessory dwelling units on a principal lot, it enables the oversight of the property by the principal residence, which can reduce the negative association with short-term rental accommodations and potentially less likely to be used as things like party houses. It may also reduce property standard complaints for this type of use because it's being used as a residence. So at this point, we have not received any complaints with the property standard bylaw services regarding this type of use. So next I'll speak to the definition and regulations. As previously mentioned, they're currently not defined or regulated in the bylaw. This definition has been based on our review of other municipalities, as well determining a definition that addresses the needs that the City of Brantford has. Staff recommend the following definition that you can see here. So short-term rental accommodation shall mean a dwelling unit or their part of, in which temporary accommodation is made available to members of the traveling public for a maximum of 20 consecutive days per stay and does not include a bed and breakfast establishment. So this definition will address the short-term rental accommodation shall take place within or as part of a dwelling unit. The purpose of the maximum number of consecutive days per stay is to differentiate between short-term and long-term rentals. Any rental above 28 days would then be considered a long-term rental. The proposed definition also distinguishes between the difference between a short-term rental accommodation use and a bed and breakfast use. Bed and breakfast establishments are currently defined and regulated in both the City of Brantford and the County of Brant zoning bylaws. Bed and breakfast establishments are only permitted within a portion, a bedroom, of a principal residence and operated by the owner of the unit. Traditionally, bed and breakfasts are secondary to the primary residential use, and the owner-operator is present during the stay. Sometimes meals are also provided. This differs from short-term rental accommodations where entire dwelling units can be rented out and do not require the owner to be available. So planning staff are recommending that short-term rental accommodations be permitted where residential uses are permitted. This would include all residential zones, a select few commercial zones where residential uses are permitted, as well as within agricultural zones within the County of Brant in the annex, County and Brant zoning bylaw within the annex lands. So the proposed regulations include principal residence requirement, prohibiting short-term rental accommodations and bed and breakfasts on the same lot, parking requirements, applying the principal and accessory use regulations that apply to the lands, and requiring short-term rental accommodations to be registered through the registry program. So staff recommend that there's requiring short-term rental accommodations to be located within a primary residence. Planning staff are of the opinion that in defining a principal residence for short-term accommodation use, that the entire of an accessory dwelling unit shall be included as part of the owner's main residence. Requiring that short-term rental accommodations are within a primary principal residence will remove pressures on long-term housing market, as it will prohibit investors from purchasing these lands for the sole purposes of creating short-term rental accommodations, and will ensure that those units are then available on the long-term market. Allowing entire accessory dwelling units on the principal residence to be used as a short-term rental accommodation will also provide the opportunity of the homeowner of the building to have autonomy over how the entirety of their principal residence is used. This approach has also been applied in municipalities such as the town of Oakville. Planning staff are of the opinion that when an entire residence or accessory dwelling unit is rented out as a short-term accommodation, the associated parking regulations for the principal and accessory use shall apply. So this would be, for example, if an individual was to rent out their entire property as a single listing while on vacation, the parking for the residential use would provide the appropriate parking. Similarly, the zoning bylaw requires accessory dwelling units to have at least one parking space per unit. Planning staff will consider the parking parameters that were outlined by the Committee of the Whole Operations Administration on their meeting on March 2nd. Planning staff also recommend that permitting tandem parking for short-term rental accommodations, and this is consistent with other parking regulations for additional units. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Alexandra. Any questions from committee members? None?
I have a question.
Oh, great.
So I first, through you, Mr. Chair, want to thank municipal staff for putting this presentation together. I know this is some foresight on the staff and the council's part to identify not an issue at hand, but an issue that could become necessary for regulation in the future. The Brantford Brant Chamber of Commerce is, we have circulated a discussion paper on this particular bylaw, and I know what we're doing today is recommending that this presentation be received as information. I wanted to bring up for dialogue one element of what is being proposed. And I want to preface that dialogue by identifying that the Condominium Act, Section 58 of the 1998 Condominium Act, speaks to the condominium corporation's requirements and obligations for safety, property upkeep, property standards, and each condominium corporation enacts its own bylaws accordingly. So between that and the Income Tax Act of Canada, I think sufficient regulatory leverages exist to deal with the potential problems commonly associated with short-term rentals. I think the way that staff has approached parking regulations and areas within the urban environment where they're permitted is entirely logical, and it makes a lot of sense to me. But I have to register that I have concerns about the element of it being a principal residence. And I think the items that are worth considering are the outcomes of negatively impacting tourism, negatively impacting the sector of jobs created in the development industry and property and real estate development. I think there are some significant upside benefits to short-term accommodations to a lot of sectors. And I think it just merits further consideration that there could be potential exemptions allowed for non-primary residences. And I'll point to the Income Tax Act here as well. The Income Tax Act gives a property owner every right to rent out on and it doesn't stipulate, but presumably the implication here is on a long-term basis, a property for the express purpose of generating income. And as a consequence, the framework for purchasing a unit is changed. There are HST rebates available to people who adopt a unit as a primary residence. And if you are claiming that, then that becomes your primary residence. If you don't declare it your primary residence, there's a tax hit to you, but you can still engage in owning a unit. And I'm just concerned that if the city passes a bylaw that enforces that every single short-term rental must be a primary residence, there might be a deleterious effect on tourism, job creation, economic growth, and prosperity in the community generally. And I think that's generally the line of the Chamber of Commerce, is that over-regulation, even if it's inadvertent, can have negative impacts on the economy. Having said that, we understand that the hotel and hospitality industry as a whole has some regulatory burdens on it that make the potential for income generation disproportionately favored in terms of short-term rentals. So I think what I would recommend is an approach to try and normalize the burden on the hospitality sector that has to pay different taxes and rates in order to meet a standard for their income generated by hotel stays. And I think a normalization of some of those practices to short-term rentals would be more balanced than just saying you may not use a primary residence. So that's my point. I think there's a lot of good information contained in this report, and I do want to thank staff for doing the research here. But I think there's room for dialogue on the principal residence piece.
Thank you, Paul. Any other comments or questions from committee members? Councillor Adley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Alexandra. Alexandra, can you comment on the reaction from hotels, motels in the city, please, if that's possible?
Thank you, Councillor Utley. So at the March 2nd Committee of the Whole meeting, there were two delegations from hotels, and they did have concerns with the proposed concerns with short-term rental accommodations within the city, and that was one of their comments. We also have Jill Binkley, who was in discussion with the hotels within Brantford so far, and she may have additional comments on that from to answer your questions, Councillor Utley.
But I knew the answer, but I wanted I thought it was useful for the committee members to know what the reaction was. That I had 2 or 3 hotels approach me, and they were quite concerned that it wasn't a level playing field with them. But I think, as Paul has mentioned, the short-term rentals provide other benefits to the community in terms of restaurants and sightseeing and tourism and so on. So it's just we never heard anything before COVID hit us, and I think that's been a driving force of concern for hotel operators. Tough times for everyone.
Thank you. And just to further, Councillor Utley, this will be going to the public and included in our public notice. We have included hotels and the different platforms in that, so they will be aware that this is coming forward to the public shortly.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Joe, did you have a comment?
No, I don't, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Carrie? Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So I know registration is being proposed. Is there fees with that registration and then taxes on the rentals? I didn't see anything in the report about taxes or fees.
Through the chair, if I may, Jill Binkley, Supervisor of Licensing. Through the chair to Carrie, I can advise on the registration process, what that looks like, and the fee proposed for registration, which is basically, it would see the short-term accommodations providing their information online, uploading, bits of information that were approved in the council resolution for a fee of $50. And why the fee is $50 is there's no pre-inspections on the property or things like that, where you would see that in more of a comprehensive licensing program with a higher fee. So basically, we're trying to start small, get some information, get a handle on what may be out there. So the $50 fee would cover sort of the administration of that registration program.
Okay. All right. So then there's no taxes beyond that, no accommodation tax or GST or anything that they have to pay beyond that?
Through the chair, that is correct. As far as the municipal accommodation tax goes, that may be better answered by a tourism partner, but from what we understand, the municipal accommodation tax was proposed sort of pre-COVID and then hasn't been established yet, even for the hotel motel sector.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
Jill. Does that answer everything for you?
Yes, I think for
Carrie?
now. No, just she mentioned there's no inspections or anything, so there's no health and safety, fire, that sort of inspections done on these places.
Through the chair, so that is correct as far as the registration program is concerned. A number of platforms may have different things that they require as part of regulating these places that advertise on their sites. It would still be the responsibility of the owner. Different legislation looks at these things differently. So for example, fire may view it as more of a private residential dwelling, where you have different legislation in the fire code that would apply to lodging houses or things of that nature. So you may see updates to various legislation as these things kind of take off, but what is proposed is strictly a registration process, and the owners would fill out a questionnaire and submit that would, say how many fire extinguishers and things like that, but it doesn't get into the depth that our licensing programs cover. And they would, sort of agree to terms and conditions as part of that would be reviewed by the city's legal team before they go live as well.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Carrie, you're all set? Any other questions, comments for staff? No one?
Mark has his hand up.
Oh, Mark. I don't see him. Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just a follow up to the licensing staff. Is that $50 registration an annual or a one-time?
Through the chair, that is proposed as an annual fee, just to encourage the updating of information so we can try to keep things as accurate as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments or questions? I don't see any hands on the screen, so. All right. May I please get a mover and a seconder on the following motion? That the Planning Advisory Committee receive this report as information and provide feedback to be considered for the recommendation report to the Committee of the Whole, Community Development. Have a mover? Thank you. And seconder, Mark is first, and who's second? Julia, I don't see any hands on here. I've only
Sorry,
got a few.
Dennis Dalloway has his hand up.
That's great. Thanks, Dennis. Second. So as part of the discussion, members are encouraged to provide their comments, which can be incorporated into the motion for the vote. So please, please come forward with your comments. Paul?
Yes, I guess my comment here has to do with the accommodations tax charged to hotel and motel operators in the city. I'm sympathetic to the fact that the playing field between them having to pay taxes on income generated from their properties related to short-term rental of their units does not equate to the regulatory burden of people renting on Airbnb, VDRO, those platforms. So on that front, I want to represent the interests of the hospitality sector that is reeling right now, and say that as we move forward, whatever bylaw gives consideration to the burden that those corporate organizations have to undertake to rent their properties, that we try and find some normalization between the two different operators within the same space here. My second comment is that I really truly believe that the regulatory framework of the Income Tax Act, the Condominium Act, and other pieces of legislation speak adequately to the dwelling type, and to address a comment or a question from Carrie earlier, housing standards and building codes regulate the safety and well-being. And I'm just concerned that the city is taking on more regulatory burden than it needs to in restricting the use of these to primary residences. And so I think between those two comments, you can find some nice balance for both sides of this pretty dynamic sector that has quite a lot of positive spin-off benefits to the rest of the economy.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody else have some comments or feedback they'd like to add? Don't see any.
Mark Simpson has his hand up.
Yeah, there we go. Back to Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment would be the report that we have in front of us was very well written and covered a number of different issues, outlining what was going on and the city's response to them. I do appreciate that. I also think that it's echoing Mr. DeSantis' comments, particularly around the Hotel Motel Association. There needs to be some way to balance some of their interests as well. I'm not certain that I have the same level of concern over the, well, I haven't read through the Condominium Act nor the Income Tax Act. I think that maintaining the principal residence portion of this seems to work, as it leaves the short-term rental accommodation portion part of someone who lives there. And I think that's quite important, as opposed to the absentee landlord. So I do like this.
Thanks, Mark. Any other comments? Just going through my screener, I don't see anybody else. Okay, Madam Clerk, can you please confirm for the committee the motion, including comments, that the committee will vote on?
Sure. Thank you very much, through the chair. So just as it's been a while since we've done this, so throughout the conversation, I've written down some of the notes associated with it. And this motion, we would list off what the notes were, and with leave of the mover and seconder, include them in the main motion to be forwarded as the comments. And the committee would vote on the composition of all of these comments. So the body is stating, so it's not an individual member, it's the body that agrees with the viewpoint. So I have a few things that the Planning Advisory Committee forward the following comments that the normalization of the tax burden of hotel and motel businesses be considered in comparison to short-term rental accommodations. Is that an accurate description, Mr. Bazanti? Okay. And then the second portion of this, we kind of had two conflicting comments. So there's two ways to kind of deal with this. One being that that consideration be made in regards to potential exemptions for the primary residence. And then I heard from Mr. Simpson that, you know, there was a benefit to the way that it was. So there's two ways in which we can handle this through the chair. We can vote on that one individually, if that wants to be the opinion of the body, or keep it out completely.
Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since I was the voice that sort of brought up the principal residence issue, perhaps we can phrase the motion in a way that allows for the report as written to be considered, with the additional consideration of offering exemptions at some level of diligence to be determined by staff and by council that allows a non-primary residence dwelling to be considered as acceptable in some sort of circumstance, whatever that may be. I don't want to close the door on that entirely, but seeing as how this is being presented, and we haven't really dialogued a lot on this, maybe future dialogue can create a level of comfort with what framework would allow a non-primary residence to be acceptable as a short-term rental.
Mark?
That would be acceptable to me. I think that would cover, it would cover off my concern by allowing it to be looked at further at a future date.
Madam Clerk, can you summarize this again now that we've come to this point, please?
Sure, just give me a quick second here. Can you guys see this? That the Planning Advisory Committee received this report as information. The following comments be forwarded to city staff for inclusion in the report to Committee of the Whole Community Development. The Planning Advisory Committee is supportive of the short-term accommodation zoning bylaw amendment, as short-term rentals can benefit the city. However, encourages further dialogue on the restrictions of primary residence only and consideration of exemptions made available. That normalization of the tax burden of the hotel motel business be considered in comparison to short-term rentals.
It looks good. Any comments or concerns from any members?
Mr. Finney has his hand up.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Kevin Finney, I'm the Director of Economic Development Tourism. I am the staff liaison for the Economic Development Advisory Committee, but as well as the Planning Advisory Committee in some capacity. I just wanted to point out a bit of clarification around the municipal accommodation tax. So currently there is no municipal accommodation tax. City Council did direct staff to form a task force around this issue, and it was decided when COVID hit that that'd be postponed. So right now, hotels nor motels, they are not paying an additional tax.
Thanks, Kevin. Carrie?
Yes. Sorry, can I just clarify the one point? I'm confused. I may be being a little stupid on this, but when they say an accessory dwelling unit, could that be another building on the same property? Is that what accessory means?
Alexandra, can you answer that, or?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So accessory dwelling units are currently permitted on a lot, and they can be up to 2 accessory dwelling units and the principal residential unit, and they can be located in accessory buildings. and they are regulated under section 6.3 of our zoning bylaw. So they would have to meet the requirements of the accessory building requirements as well as accessory dwelling unit requirements. So it could be within an accessory building. It just needs to meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw, but it would be within the same lot.
Okay. And I know as well, there's going to be a few properties downtown affected by this. One in particular I can think of is a multi-use unit with commercial downstairs and apartments upstairs, where the owner lives in one of those apartments. So would that be considered appropriate to be able to rent out the other units? Would that be considered her primary residence, even though it's a multi-use building?
Through you, Chair, at this point, yes, that is what planning staff are considering as even in a mixed use development, if it is the principal residence of the individual, then they can rent it out.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay, Madam Clerk, do one more chance. Anybody have any other comments? I'll just have a quick scan across here and see if there's anybody. No? No hands?
Sorry, one thing, Mr. Chair.
Oh, there we go. Paul?
Given that the amended proposed motion that we're considering voting on says future dialogue, I was just wondering if we could speak to the format or the forum in which that dialogue would occur.
Madam Clerk, can you help us with that?
Sure, through the chair. So are you seeking for staff? Are you seeking for staff to come back to this committee and provide opportunities for that? Or are you asking that, because what happens through the chair, these comments will go forwards in the report. So you could put in there that that the Planning Advisory Committee or Economic Development Advisory Committee, if council chooses to consider this, be included in that consideration. Is that what you're seeking?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. This meeting today is not the forum for us to discuss and fully vet out our opinions on these things and come to a cohesive conclusion. And so I think a further dialogue with this committee before any final bylaw be approved be part of that dialogue. I guess that's what I'm asking. And then as a whole, this committee can coalesce its opinion on what the most appropriate bylaw would be.
Madam Clerk?
Yeah, so through the chair, we can include that. We can include that in there. Now, this does go forwards in the report, so it would be up to council if they so choose to direct that for staff to come back to you guys. We can definitely put that in the memo that you are seeking further input in regards to this if there are exemptions made on this.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I think that's the most appropriate thing. We don't want to belabor the point here before anyone's really had a chance to wrestle with the pros and cons of it. So if it's up to council's discretion to re-engage the committee in part of that conversation down the road, then we trust our elected officials to represent the interests of the community, and they do a bang up job. So I'm happy with that.
Great, thanks, Paul. All right, Madam Clerk, are we ready to take a vote on this?
Yes. So all of those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand and leave it raised until your name is called. Paul Bazanti, Councillor Utley, Dennis Dalloway, Mark Simpson, Ken Karakas, Greg Nevin, Mohammed Mabrouk, and sorry, Carrie Corfin, is your hand up? Oh, sorry, you're not a voting member. I do apologize for that. And Kirby Brown. Great. All those against the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries.
Great. Thank you. All right, we'll go to 4.2. Technical amendments to the City of Brantford zoning bylaw 160-90 and 2021-258. First item here we're considering is in regards to the zoning bylaw amendment for a citywide technical amendment. I understand that staff have a short presentation to introduce the item to the committee. Staff, please introduce yourself and present to the members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sean House. I'm a planner in the Development Planning Department here at the city. And I'm here because we're proposing some technical amendments to our zoning bylaw, general housekeeping measures that would facilitate the day-to-day use of that bylaw. So to start off, and for everyone's benefit, I'll just do a high-level view of what a zoning bylaw actually is. It's a law that states how land across the city may be used, the types of buildings that are permitted in different areas of the city, where those buildings are located on those properties, as well as things like the zoning bylaw also permits how many parking spaces are required for certain uses, what the maximum building height is, how far set back from the street they should be. And the purpose of this amendment is just to update different regulations that planning staff, building staff come across on a day-to-day basis that would make processing this zoning bylaw more efficient. There's also some amendments that would keep the zoning bylaw current with new updates to provincial policy, and also address certain trends within the community and development industry. So to start off, just some housekeeping items will be taken care of with this amendment. Some of them are just typographical or mapping errors that have come up with new zones. So we'd just be, for example, this on the map on the slides labeled the R4867 zone. We would just be changing that to the R4A 68 zone. Updating terms to reflect current provincial policy. As an example, our previous bylaw, or our current bylaw, has a type of dwelling unit called a second unit dwelling. But with recent provincial policy, this is updated to accessory dwelling unit. So we'd be making those changes, defining certain things, and then just a small removing a holding provision on certain properties where lands have been consolidated and building permits have been issued. Okay, so I do have three amendments coming to the bylaw that might not fit under the category of housekeeping. The first one is adding a definition for a stacked townhouse. So the elevation on this slide is what this built form would look like. At a high level, it's a townhouse unit with one unit on top of the other, both with access or doors at grade. There's not currently a definition in our zoning bylaw for it. However, we are seeing a lot of proposals for this built form, and adding a definition for this use would give staff kind of a starting point on regulating them. So I've provided our proposed definition of stacked townhouse in front of you on the slide. I'm not going to go through it, but we did work on this with our building department, and it's largely based off of the other townhouse definitions, such as a block townhouse or a street townhouse that currently exists in our zoning bylaw. The next amendment we'll be making is to our mixed-use building regulations. For everyone's benefit, mixed-use building is a building with commercial uses at grade and dwelling units above. So specifically, we'll be ensuring that the definition refers to a dwelling unit as opposed to a residential use. And in certain instances, our current regulations in the C1 zone have been interpreted as that the ground floor use would be able to be a parking lot or structure. So it wouldn't really be a retail use, but that's not really meeting the intent of what a mixed use building is. So we'll be cleaning that up just to ensure that there is a commercial use on the ground floor and not just a parking lot. And the rendering that I've included on this slide here, it's for a development that we currently have a site plan application in for a mixed use building. This one will be approved shortly. It's at the corner of Erie Avenue and Market Street South. Finally, the last technical amendment we'll be moving forward is to permit tandem parking for converted dwelling units. And this is in accordance with some recent provincial regulations that have came out that stipulate that municipalities must include in their zoning bylaw that tandem parking be permitted for accessory dwelling units. And actually that regulation was included in our last technical amendment, but it still wasn't applying across the city in certain zones where accessory dwelling units weren't permitted. And that's because converted dwellings were permitted in those zones. So now we're just carrying that provision for tandem parking over to converted dwelling units as well. In terms of next steps, we'll be further consulting with their internal departments and agencies. We'll also be holding a public information center within the next couple of months about these amendments and bringing a report to the committee of the whole sometime later in 2021. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sean. Anyone have any questions for Sean?
Sorry, Mark Simpson does have his hand up. And Sean, if you could just please stop sharing your screen. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, just a question regarding the parking not being primary use in the mixed use building in the C1 zone. Would that have any impact in the C1 zone for something that's not a mixed use building, but was a parking structure or lot already?
Sean?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask the member just to maybe clarify his question a little bit. So are you asking, if there's an existing parking lot or a parking garage within the C1 zone, would that be affected by this amendment?
Yes, that's exactly what I was asking. So that it's not a mixed use building already. It's in the C1 zone and it's just a parking lot. And I don't know if a parking lot's actually allowed in a C1 zone.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. Parking lots, parking structures are permitted in the C1 zone. This amendment would not affect those already existing parking lots or structures.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? None? All right. May I please get a mover and a seconder for the following motion? That the Planning Advisory Committee receive this report as information and provide feedback to be considered for the recommendation report to the Committee of the Whole, Community Development. Do I have a-
I so move, Mr. Chair.
Oh, there you go. Thank you, Paul. And second? I got to move my screen around here to find everybody. There's Kirby. Thank you. Second. And do we have some comments or recommendations at this point from anyone? None? All right, Madam Clerk. Can you please confirm for the committee the motion including comments that the committee will vote on?
Yes, through the chair, so the motion would be that the following comments be forwarded to city staff for inclusion in the report to the Committee of the Whole Community Development, that there are no concerns or comments associated with this application.
Sounds like that's where we're at. So can we take a vote, please?
All those in favor, please raise your hand. Paul Bazanti, Councillor Utley, Dennis Dalloway, Mark Simpson, Ken Krakis, Greg Nevane, Kirby Brown. All those against? Oh, sorry, Mohammed Mabrook. I'm sorry, Miss Morrison, are you in favor? Yes,
Yes,
thank you.
yes.
Thank you very much. So the motion carries. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. And moving on to number 5, consent items. Can I get a mover and a seconder for approval of the minutes? Mark Simpson. Seconder is Dennis Dalloway. Thank you very much. Any errors or omissions to be noted? Nobody has any? Okay. I'll ask the clerk to call the vote, please.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. Mr. Bazanti, Councillor Utley, Mr. Dalloway, Mr. Naveen, Mr. Brown, Mr. Simpson, Mr. Krakis, Mohammed, and Mr. Mabrook, and Ms. Morrison. Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Resolutions, there are none. Notices of motion, there are no notices of motion. So I want to thank you all and bring this meeting to adjournment. Having concluded the business of the committee, it is hereby adjourned.